Hi. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening, everybody. I feel like I'm at a reunion. How many people recognize what we're showing here on the screen? Yeah, I think a lot of you do. And thank you to Alice Griffin for putting together that slideshow. Yes, yes. So welcome. My name is Marcia Eli. It is absolutely a thrill to have this room packed, and thank you for those for whom there's standing room only. This is a very popular program, and I feel as if it means a lot to a lot of people in this room who maybe are in this world of locations and filmmaking. We at the Center for Brooklyn History are really proud to be presenting this. It's been a long time in the planning. Just a word, if you haven't been to the Center for Brooklyn History before, I give you an extra special welcome. CBH is home for the most expansive collection of Brooklyn history in the world, in addition to having a gorgeous, much scouted Othmer library above us. And in addition to being a research institution and bringing these collections to scholars, students, and the public at large, we provide education programs, mount a wide range of exhibitions, and offer free weekly public programs like this one. In the next month or so, this stage will see photographer Jamel Shabazz, Washington Post editorial writer Eugene Robinson, prison reform activist Mariam Kaba, MSNBC's Chris Hayes, and two Bad Bunny scholars whose new book talks about Bad Bunny as the voice of Puerto Rican resistance. So, as you can see from the slide behind me, you can find out about all these programs by getting an email every Tuesday if you go to that QR code and sign up for our e-newsletter. And I really hope you do, and that this, for those of you who are here for the first time, it won't be the first and last time that you're in this room. So on to this evening. Tonight's program is inspired by the completion of a massive collection processing project. Its formal title is the Brooklyn Location Scouting Photographs Collection. It's a mouthful. So to kick us off and tell us more about how a warehouse or two full of boxes stacked floor to ceiling with thousands of photos of locations was turned into a formal collection now stewarded by the Center for Brooklyn History, it's my great pleasure to welcome the person who made that magic happen. Please welcome my colleague, Alice Griffin.
All right, thank you, Marcia. It is, of course, every archivist's dream to speak in front of over 100 people, so thank you all for making that happen. My name is Alice Griffin. I'm an archivist here at Center for Brooklyn History. Thank you so much to Marcia, to the panelists for being here tonight. Also, thank you to Ben Himes and Dan Welch, who met with Marcia and me while this program was being planned. And also a special thank you to Lynn Pinizic, who donated the collection, and to Natiba Guy Clement, the director of special collections here, who brought this collection in. Okay, so first, a quick introduction to the Othmer Library just upstairs. If you've never been, it's very beautiful. If you were coming in to look at this collection, this is where you would go. We would bring the collection out to you, and you do not have to be an academic, a student, to come and use any of our resources. You simply have to be interested in them, and we are happy to let you look at them. So the reason that we are all here tonight, the collection that I'm going to be talking about is the Brooklyn Location Scouting Photographs Collection. This is a collection of folders of photographs scouted, photographs by location scouts from scouting locations in Brooklyn from the 1980s to 2011. So what do these folders look like? They are manila folders with maybe the location written in the tab, and then the location written on the front, maybe in an establishing shot, or a map with the location highlighted of where the scout was taking photos of. Sometimes there might be contact information about who to contact if they're interested in shooting there. And inside these folders are these beautifully taped 4x6 photographs in these wonderful panoramic views. And these locations were everywhere: apartments, houses, bars, restaurants, subway stations, schools, churches, bowling alleys, you name it, they're in this collection. So, yes, these photographs are meant to elicit such a response. Here's a view into the Long Island warehouse facility where these records were transferred to us from. So this location came to us in two parts. The first part in 2010, when Lynn reached out, they were moving out of a New Jersey storage space, downsizing, and so we split up the collection. The New York Historical Society took the non-Brooklyn related materials, and we took the Brooklyn related materials. At that point, we were the Brooklyn Historical Society. In 2021, Lynn reached out again, moving out of the Long Island warehouse facility. As you can imagine, with the rise in digital photography, and managing and sharing these photographs digitally, these photographs were not used as much, but I'm sure you all would be talking about that later. So I just wanted to show these photographs to give you a sense of the scope of the collection, so you can see some of those labels on them. Let's say like country houses, industrial office lofts, and I'll let the panelists speak more about how these folders were created and more about how this space was used. But I wanted to show these incredible photographs from Lynn. So, what is my role in all of this? As an archivist, part of my job is to process archival collections. That's arranging them physically and intellectually so that they can be used for research. What does that mean in relation to this collection? I don't have the time to go into archival theory right now, but basically, one part is that we want to keep the creator's original order as much as possible. When that is not present, then the archivist can impose an order on it. This was kind of a tough collection because there was, as you can see, clearly there was original order, as you could see in the last slide, but after the collection had been broken up and also several archivists had worked on it since 2010. And as I learned in the green room, maybe also there were different new signs taped on old signs, so it got a little jumbled. But we also decided that for our researchers, the collection being organized by neighborhood would be useful for them. So the collection is arranged by neighborhood and then chronologically under that. But don't worry, I still kept those original categorizations and any information about the movie that the location was scouted for in the finding aid that you can see on the left-hand side there. And there's the URL to it if you want to start looking at it right away. So when I started processing this collection, it was 38 feet to start, 38 linear feet. So think about that's 38 bankers boxes, essentially. And it took me over a year to process this. It is a large collection, but part of why I was so slow at processing it is because of the size of the collection. I had to use an offsite storage facility to process it. So I was only able to be there about one day a week. And now the collection is about 120 boxes, and it's 120 linear feet and about 91 boxes. And so what happened? Did this collection just get bigger? Not really. Some of the folders have these beautiful fold-out panoramas, and so to better house them for the long term, I flattened those, and so they're in these oversized boxes that you can see there, which take up more space. As expected, this collection has already gotten a lot of research use, neighborhood research. I had someone reach out who found her grandfather's photos of her grandfather's catering hall and was thrilled to receive photos of those. We also have already been supporting public programs of this collection. We had a screening of a documentary about the Starlight Lounge in Crown Heights, which is now closed. And before the screening, there was a performance by drag artist Ella Fitzgerald, and you can see in the background that that is a photo from the collection of a room in the Starlight Lounge. And I only see this use growing. I think we'll definitely be receiving inquiries about film history that will be answered by this collection, but it also fits in really beautifully with these other photo collections of Brooklyn streets, or New York City streets, really. So there's if you don't know them already, the 1940s and the 1980s tax photo collection at the New York City Municipal Archives. And also here we have the John D. Morell photographs. So you can see it fits in very nicely there. All right, so a couple of highlights. One, Lynn pointed out this folder to me when we were preparing for the presentation. This was scouted in 1991 by Jeff Frederick for Scent of a Woman with Al Pacino, and it's Dumbo, and it's just a completely different streetscape than we know now. So I wanted to show that to you all. And lastly, personal highlight of mine is Mark Lanes in Bay Ridge. I think this kind of speaks for itself of why it's so amazing. But this is also a good example you can see of the information that would be on the front of one of these folders. And I don't know if you can see it very well, but in the lower left-hand corner, there's someone wrote "no!" exclamation point. So I don't think it was used in that, whoever wrote that. All right, so that's the end of my presentation, but don't worry, we'll be showing more examples of these and you'll be hearing more about this evening, but thank you all so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Alice. Can we just take a moment to consider how huge this effort was? Taking a gazillion boxes, all with titles that naturally relate to what you'd find in a scene description in a screenplay, like Sleepy Town, but not necessarily making any sense to a general research public, and then meticulously reordering them by neighborhood so they can be easily researched from now until forever. Can we give Alice another round of applause, please? All right, so we're going to move on to our panel. And I'm going to invite everybody to come up, and I'll introduce everybody once we're on stage. Okay, all right. So going from my left here, Eric Papa is a location scout, photographer, and filmmaker with over 25 years of experience. He's collaborated on over 60 feature film and television production, and his photography was recently featured at the Photoville Festival here in Brooklyn. I'm making these very short. I could go on with a lot of credits, but let's not do that because it would take forever. Lynn Pinazip, Close it. Pinazic began as a location scout and manager decades ago, and you've heard a lot about Lynn already. On films like The Scent of a Woman, she moved into production managing, working on large-scale productions such as American Gangster, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and Jurassic World Rebirth. Thank you, Lynn. Next to Lynn is Malika Johnson. Malika has worked in the tri-state area as a location scout for more than 20 years on big-budget feature films such as The Dark Knight Rises, as well as prestige dramas like Boardwalk Empire. She's a lifelong New Yorker. Welcome, Malika. And Joe Guest is a New York-based producer with over 25 years of experience in film and television production. Joe began his career as a location manager on projects ranging from the more intimate to period and large scale. His recent credits include executive producer of the current award-winning film Marty Supreme. All right. So thanks to Lynn, we have a prop here. Folders. I don't know what we're going to do with them, but there are many of them here, and they're all Brooklyn-based, and I'll give you one. Where to begin? I think we need to begin with you, Lynn. I think we need to begin with what were you doing and how did this happen? And then, Joe, maybe you can fill in.
Well, I think what happened is, and you know, I'll touch on some of this too when I talk about the file I picked out, but there wasn't really a locations department until like maybe starting in the late 80s. And one of the reasons that it came about is because of the birth of 1 hour photo labs. So in the olden days, they weren't making a lot of movies in New York. And if there was a movie that was New York based, they would build the sets in LA. They would fly here maybe once to scout the locations and shoot here as little as possible and then scurry on back to LA. So when the 1 hour photo lab started opening, suddenly you could do all your scouting ahead of time. You could spend the day scouting. You'd go to Flash Photo or one of the other well-known for some of us places that catered to location scouts. You'd paste everything up, and you would either bring it back to your office at night or you'd go to the late FedEx at Leroy Street and ship it off to LA. And so it became easier to scout. They wanted to see more. You started scouting more, and all of a sudden, you know, you were building up boxes and boxes of files like that on every job. So at first, people started like keeping them in their garages, under their beds, in their storage areas. And then we all kind of collectively, because it's a very communal industry, we're like, we should kind of try to like kind of get this a little organized. And we were lucky in that we found places that we could move the boxes en masse as they got bigger by generous location connections that gave us spaces for free. And then we started like having sort of a code of like, if you drop all your boxes at the end of a movie, you can show up anytime you want and pull for your next movie. Like you're doing Enchanted and in Times Square, and then your next job is a period gangster movie. You're dumping all your current day files and you're starting to pull all the brownstones and the mansions and everything. So it was all very communal.
So you were really good at finding free space. Yes. But Joe, I'd love to hear what you have to say. And one of the things that was particularly interesting to me when I was talking to you all in advance was the fact that location scouting didn't even exist before the 80s. It wasn't a job. And it had to do with what Lynn was talking about, which is 1 hour photos and the interest in episodic, television here shot on location in New York. And so I'd love for you to talk both a little bit about, the genesis of this field that's now booming and your memories of these, because you are an OG. And I didn't say that. A lot of
No, I
other people
appreciate
described that.
No, it's interesting, and I appreciate what Lynn was saying about. I mean, look, it was a small community. You had to be, you know, you have to be talented to be presenting locations to a Hollywood production. Keep in mind that just not that long ago, there were only a few productions in New York in a year. There would be like Law and Order, and then a couple movies, a Woody Allen movie, you know, maybe something else would come into town, as Lynn says. When I started scouting later, that many people here were scouts 10 years before I was, or more. But when I started scouting, it was a lot of like, you know, movies shot in LA coming to town for 2 weeks, but it kept scouts working for a month or two because you had to go find the locations, everything. Being a good photographer was important because you're presenting images, presenting something creatively, which is a really important part of this process, that is going to appeal to a production designer, a director of a movie, and to understand what the location looks like. So I kind of forget what your question is, but I'm meander for a second. But so, you know, like I actually started out, I was a photographer when I was in college. I took all the photography classes. I had a dark room in my grandparents' basement. So I became a good scout because in my mind, I was a good photographer as well. And so, you know, you had to present these things. And what was genius about this folder setup is, so like this is an amazing folder, by the way, that incidentally I shot in Brooklyn 20 years ago. But there's a Dynamic, which is an industrial laundry facility. And so, but the point of this format is you would do the pans, you'd show this is the view this way, and this is the reverse. So if you're a filmmaker, you know, if you go to the end of that alley and look back, you see this. So these folders were an amazing way to simply just say, here's what the location looks like. You flip through it. So, you know, the director can say, well, what happens when you go around the corner there? And if you're a good scout, you're presenting that. If you're not, or you weren't thinking of the script, or you didn't know what the director was imagining, you know, you might end up with the no on the corner of the folder, right? That was probably a location manager scribbling, saying, not this one, not that one. But it was a small community, and so like this collection of folders came about because it was a lot of like, Lynn was the location manager, and this core group of people that were working with her, Mike Cryaris and myself and others, just started collecting and like keeping them, because that was our database. We didn't have the digital of it all. You didn't have hard drives full of stuff and the ability to keep it that way. So this was our database, and it was a really good thing for a location manager to be able to have that resource to say, oh, you want to look at a bunch of brownstones in New York really quickly and be able to determine if you have something for the movie. Here's 3 boxes of brownstones that we can rifle through and get a sense creatively of if we're in the right direction or what we need to continue to scout.
I mean, what was amazing to me in looking at some of the names of the boxes and how you all organized them is that it was brownstones, and it was mansions, and it was McMansions, and it was fancy houses, and it was fancy houses in Westchester. I mean, there was a whole system that kind of like, grew. And, I'd love to hear a little bit, Malika and Eric, about, what it was like to sort of meet up at the end of your day of photographing and be in that space with the paper cutters and, the noise. And I don't know, you said something about there was no electricity. So how did you handle that?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's kind of like Cheers, but we're still at work instead of after work, almost. Just thinking back to Photomax, which a lot of people in this audience are well familiar with. That was on gosh, it was Carmine Street, I think, and the basement. And we'd all go down, late afternoon at the end of the day, and everybody working on whatever different project it was, we'd all, put in our film or, our memory cards at that point, wait for them to get developed. Oh, what are you working on? What are you working on? What are you looking for? Do you know, what's a good place to find X, Y, and Z? And we just chat, and then we'd all get our photos, and then it would just be like, clockwork of just the sound of tape and paper cutters and flipping folders. And then it was like repetitive. But it was like, it was a community that was built, we're still talking while we're doing this because we got into a rhythm, at some point. But we'd like look at each other's photos and admire them, or say, oh, you know what, if you put it that way, this will make more sense, or things like that. And labeling, we would take like spare photos that, just we thought were funny when we were on location or whatever. We put them up on the wall, so that wall turned into a very large collage of just like ridiculous things, that we put together. But it was very communal. I mean, still is. We don't all see each other, every day. Me and Joe did a job and we didn't see each other once last year. But, it's still that community bond is still there. And we still, now we're not physically watching each other work, but we'll still ask the same questions. Oh, what are you working on? What are you looking for? Do you need this? I have that. Where's a good place to find X, Y, and Z? So the dynamics are still the same. It's just like the mode of us seeing each other every day aren't there anymore. But, it's a lot less paper cuts and things like that. So, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of what Joe was saying, it's like, Joe came in as a photographer. Like, I literally had no idea how to take photographs until I became a location scout. And it was in that sort of space with other people who've been doing it. Like, I'm reminded of, like, working on John Spady, like, there's this kind of like legendary scout when I first started. And I was just like, man, I don't know, whatever that guy's doing just is really cool. Like, I just want to be out there, like, bringing back these things like, wow, where did you find these houses in Long Island or whatever it was? And this is all pre-Google Maps and very, so you're like, but you would come into this space and you'd sort of like look to your left and someone would be cutting a folder and like you'd find like you discover your own sort of shortcut how to do something, or you'd be like, wow, this is like terrible. And like, yeah, it's all backlit, man. Like you gotta like rebalance it. And, or like you'd put together a folder and you'd get like, like I worked a lot with Joe and he'd be like, what's the reverse this? What happens if I go through this door? What goes over here? It's like, and you're like, I don't know. That room was nothing. He's like, yeah, but I can't just say that room was nothing to Ridley Scott, it's like, it's like, and so you kind of like through this process of this community, you learn to do your job better. You learned where things were because again, now we're all like one person machines, right? It's like, I get hired a lot, it's like, and I look around this room and the people who get hired a lot, like you get hired because people trust you, that you've gone through all of these things and you're going to deliver a product to them that they won't have to sit there and try to figure out because you've done it for them. It's funny, like you see, like the tape dispensers, the paper cutters, like my kids, like I have 2 little kids and like, I still have 1 roll of double-sided tape and 1 like dispenser of regular tape, and I'm like, don't touch the double-sided stuff, because that goes on the wall and it won't come off, right? It's like, but like I think like what we miss or what I miss a lot of times is like we've all become sort of like a lone gunman, right? Like we're out there, we're on our own. Yes, you call your small little group, but what those photo places like in the basement at the end of the day, first off, it gave you a deadline to end your day. Right? Like, okay, it wasn't just the light. You're like, I got to get there to develop my film and still put these things together before it closes. And I can't remember all the guys' names at those shots, but I don't think they had lives outside of like, they were there until we were done. And, and it's like, and so you would go there and like, in some way, like, you build friendships. I've known Joe 15 years and first I met him on a job, like he was at my wedding. Like he taught me how to take better pictures. It's like, it was great. It still is great, but it's like you're on your own a lot more now.
Can I just speak to what this kind of theme, but in this, it's interesting in the digital age, and we're starting to look at our processes as human beings, what works, what are we losing with using computers and not communicating directly. This, just so you guys understand, the photo lab process, all the location scouts in New York City would end up at the same 1 or 2 photo labs at the end of every workday, and you would share information. And that's how you shared information. We weren't texting each other. We weren't on a Google group. We did not have those mechanisms. So was it more efficient or less? It's interesting. I was thinking about it, and I think it was actually a better system because you were interacting with other humans who understood what the nature of your search was and helped you navigate that. Some serious scouts or protective ones were closed off. They weren't going to share much. Others were very collaborative and would give you all kinds of tips. But the point is, you would say, man, I'm trying to find a really wide brownstone, and this designer won't accept all the things I'm showing him. And 5 other scouts would be in there. And so you had the resources of all those 5 scouts and their 10 years of scouting experience and all the places they've seen, and knowing what a challenge it is to find a wider brownstone in New York City, which is not really a real thing, as many of us know. And, so you would, it was really benefit from that. And you can't communicate a lot of that on a Google group. That said, we get a lot of information now that we do share in that kind of forum way, and you all of us, instantly you can get every industrial laundry facility that your fellow scouts have found recently. But it was a good system, and it's interesting. It worked really well.
And you know what else is because I was pulling these files from some files that I still have at home or in my storage area, and these were such good tools. The scouting, the file itself didn't end when they picked the location. This is what you took when you went to talk to the grips about the lighting position on the fire escapes across the street. Or it's what you might show, the city of New York when you had to do some special thing with traffic. And you'd walk it around the art department. And because the art department was our, partners in crime for the whole stretch of prep, everything up to when the shooting crew rolls in. And there was such a cross-pollination of ideas, especially with everyone in the office, because everybody had to be in the office. And some art director would say something about a location that they had filmed at, and some grip would mention, oh, last time we filmed underneath the Brooklyn Bridge, we got access to this warehouse rooftop, and why don't you call them? And creatively, these ideas would circulate, and you'd bounce ideas off everybody, and creatively and logistically. There's one folder in there I'll probably pull out at some point because it's a later folder from the one that or later location from the one I chose. And there's Sharpies written all over this folder. I remember that movie, and I remember that location. It was very involved. There are lighting positions circled. It was when they were building the bikeway and walkway across the Williamsburg Bridge, the bright red thing. That was 2002. And so we were taping those things in there because they were finished. And it was an incredible tool. And there's something about the focus of a file that you can gather around, and the beauty of being able to quickly flip through those pages that accelerated communication in a lot of ways.
I mean, I think that I'm feeling a real nostalgia for, that and community, loss of community or differentiation of what the community is nowadays.
I do want to also mention, because it's already touched on it a little bit, we were all freelance, so we were also in competition with each other. Yeah. And sure, it was, we were all very friendly. Some people guarded their files. But, sure, did I check to see if I scouted more files that day? I made more folders that day than the next guy? I sure did.
Before we asked everybody on the panel to pick one location We have a couple of slides of that location, and we'll talk a little bit about why they picked that particular place and what it maybe means to them. But I really want to, before we get to that, ask you one question, Joe, because when we talked in advance, you were describing that how even to this day, as a producer, you print things out, and the tactile nature of being able to see the photograph compared this one to this one, and I suspect as well that coming up through locations, has provided you a lens for the kinds of creative decision making you're making now in films. Could you talk a little bit about?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, as Lynn says, like these folders were in our office, and we would have them easily accessible to everyone to come in once a location had been selected. That's where we're going to film. We'd have our hero box of folders. We call it hero, and director approved, whatever you want to call it. But so the production people from the other departments could come in and see these are the locations where we're filming at. And you could, and when you're deciding which locations, you lay them out next to each other and see like how, what do we like about this one versus that one versus the third option. So that tactile nature is very important. And I think to your point about like, now producing movies, you definitely take all that with you in terms of how to communicate effectively, how to present things creatively, which for us in the filmmaking is a lot of images, and like helping people through the process, whether it's locations or a design for a set or casting. And, we still do that with casting. You see in a production office, you put up the different images of the actors printed out on the wall. And that's so important, in a visual medium to really see everything laid out. It gets lost on the rifling through on a computer.
I just wanted to add one thing to what Joe's saying. It's like what happens as a location scout or a location manager or whoever took that folder, right? There's usually one image that sort of captures the director's eye or the production designer. And that one image goes up, gets blown up. It's put on a bulletin board in every department, in the director's office, in your office. And like through that, there's composites made of what they're going to do. The art department does a digital rendering, and it's your photo, like that photo that you took with the scene in mind. Maybe it's from the end of the bar, whatever it happens to be. And that sort of has this life of its own until it gets to the screen. At some point in time, they put the camera right where you stood the day you went out and scouted. And it's not always easy to pick it up on the screen, but that's where it started, right? Because the camera moves about. And honestly, there's no better reward, you go to see a movie, a lot of times your stuff just ends up on the cutting room floor too, right? It's like, but you have this thing that you've carried with you. It's like, no, but it started with that shot I took of those two people sitting, in Central Park looking at the lake. And like, what did they do? Oh, they just slipped Denzel Washington in and somebody else into that same spot. And you're like, no, but that was your photograph that started that whole process.
Yeah, wonderful. So let's look at what you picked first, Eric. 26 Reed Street, circa 2010. Yeah. What are we looking at here?
So, this isn't something I shot. I was actually amazed that somebody else had shot this because I did shoot this. I picked this one in particular because I felt like this is in Red Hook. This house to me was always very recognizable because it was like the only house across from what it was then the Fairway is now something else at the very, very end. This guy was great. When I was there, he was still there. Behind that black tarp was this plexiglass grandfather clock that he had built, on his own, with his own two hands, which isn't seen in any of these pictures. But what I loved about this was kind of spoke to what attracted to me to location scouting. My first love was film as a kid. My second love was exploring. And when I discovered that they paid someone to go out and do this and take pictures, and and we worked on this movie Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, which was kind of the last time that we did folders like this before we just went full on digital. And one of the locations, or multiple locations, was this story revolved around a kid following clues that he thinks his dead dad, who died in 9/11, had left him, and he was going and trying to find Mr. Black, Mrs. Black, Old Man Black, and everyone who had the last name Black, and they were just like, we had to just go out and find all of these like as random and wild sort of locations as we could, just to keep throwing in front of Stephen Daldry, right? It's like, how about this one? How about this one? How about this one? I'm not even sure this one ended up. I couldn't recall if this one ended up, but it's like, it stood out to me just because of the random, like, there's so much going on here. But it also was like, it was this sense of like, at that time, it's like, I hadn't been to that part of like it was like kind of like a house, like, oh, I remember, like, they have life preservers and anchors hanging on the outside of the house. Like, what's behind that door? You know, like being curious and being like, yeah, come on in. Someone else has been here before in the past. It's like, shit. You know, it's like, okay. You know, it's like, but at the same time, it was just like, that's what really attracted me to this, was just that reminder of like, wow, this is like when nobody knew everything and you were just kind of like, let me just go where I want to go today and find something new.
And I bet you meet some really interesting people. Like, you know,
that was one of them.
This guy looks amazing.
Yeah. I think, you know, the funny thing is, I'm trying to remember this guy. He was an artist of some sort. This house was owned by the same folks who owned Sonny's Bar, I think. I don't know if that's still the case. It's completely changed now. It's like there's Crab Shack next to it. You know, it's like everything else. Everything is completely changed. But that house looks exactly the same on the outside now still. It's tar paper, and there's like nautical themed things. There's that garage, like if we were on the next image, like that garage goes under the entire house, and there were like 2 or 3 cars lined up in this garage. Like under, it's there. Yeah. Like, you know, like just this, like there's just so much going on. And I'm sure that guy's probably still there. I'm sure he's still there.
All right. Lynn.
Okay, I wrote stuff down. So I picked this folder because it touches on several things that really resonate with me. First, it's a folder from 1991, and it's the Williamsburg streets that were being considered for the Ferrari driving sequence on Scent of a Woman. If you remember the movie, Al Pacino was blind, is driving a Ferrari. We wound up shooting it in Dumbo. Scent of a Woman was the first time I really felt that I was like deeply a part of a movie. It was one of my first big movies. And this folder was shot by my mentor, Andy Cook, who was one of the early major location managers in New York. And I think, we touched on this a lot about how, locations departments were fairly new, and Andy Cook and some of the other, the first wave of location managers basically created the location department's shape that we know today, with an assistant location manager and then a team of scouts, and then eventually a coordinator came in. Originally, we didn't even have coordinators, but things were more simple back then. The contracts weren't so complicated. I remember you could pay Chinatown locations in cash, and just sign this thing. And, you can't really do that anymore. And the permits got more complicated. So, a full-time coordinator very quickly became a necessity. And we talked about, like, it was tricky. Also, I do want to point out that, as you can see, there was a lot more parking back then than today. And we talked out, I am going to take this moment to do a shout out to the Lustrito family from Gold Coast Studios for being the people that helped us save these things for 10 years. Who knew that these folders would become so special and apparently now very historic? Another reason I picked this one is that I did a lot of filming down here. We all did. And it's because it's so cinematic and it's so layered visually. So you bring an out-of-town director or production designer or cinematographer here, and in every direction you look, there's something interesting, and it's stacked up. It fills the frame. and it's gritty and beautiful, and it's totally Brooklyn. And I want to just tell a brief little story from my scouting days about the Williamsburg Savings Bank, which is the one with the dome. And so my little story, it just really struck me back then, and still to this day, and I think it's really appropriate to this event in this setting. So the Williamsburg Savings Bank was built in 1875, which was 30 years before the bridge was built. It still had the H at the end of the word Williamsburg because it was its own city when it was built. So many years ago, it was still a bank. And at the time, there were these huge old roll-down metal gates on all the big windows all around the whole building. And honestly, it was pretty run down and shabby, but they were film-friendly, as we say, and we wanted to film there. But because it was still a functioning bank, we had to film on the weekends. So I met with the bank manager and presented a weekend date. But he told me, oh, I'm so sorry, that's the one weekend we can't do it because we have a company coming in to take down all of those old metal gates. So I asked him, I said, were the gates like put up for like crime and like the bad old days in the 1970s New York? And he said, oh no. He said, these gates are left over from World War II when everyone had to black out at night in case the Germans sent planes to bomb the city. And I was so struck by that. And the fact that like we walk among this mosaic of history and architecture and culture, but like so much of it is really ghosts. And as scouts, more than like anybody on a film crew, and the film crew, we go everywhere. We go on top of bridges, we go in tunnels, we go in, butcher, meat packing places. But location scouts, more than anyone, get a glimpse of like through this fog of history. And, you sometimes get to see all the layers. And this location is so layered. I mean, Peter Luger's opened in, 1887. It's still there. This bank is now a nightclub or event space. And the Williamsburg Art and History Building was built, I think, in the 1850s. And then it was a bank, and then it became an art and culture center when the artists moved in the 80s. So there's these waves of history, and they come and they ebb and they flow, and sometimes you catch a wave from a different era. So I want to take this opportunity to thank you, Center for Brooklyn History, for saving all these folders so they do not become lost ghosts.
Thank you. Thank you. It occurs to me, and this is something you probably never would have thought of when you were back shooting these things in the 90s and 80s and so on, but if you were doing a period piece now in Williamsburg, somebody might want to come and look at the old pictures that you shot to see how to make it look, right? We'll see them in the archive in the future, so yeah. Okay, Malika.
Yes.
Someplace that's very near here, Brooklyn.
Yeah, Brooklyn Borough Hall. I just want to go quickly back to yours, just because that exact area was where I was scouting right before Christmas, and I was standing in the middle of the street taking photos, looking down at the Williamsburg Bridge right in front of the bank, and then went to lunch at Peter Luger's. But just funny that you picked that. So yes, obviously Brooklyn Borough Hall, which is just a couple blocks from here on Joralemon. I'm going to assume most people know this, but just so they don't, it's where the borough president's office is. A lot of ceremonies take place there. And if you live in the area, then you know it's filmed there all the time. And one of the reasons that I picked it is because you can see, like from the previous photos, that they have this gorgeous ceremonial chamber with like a raised dais, and people film in there like all the time for various different things, courtrooms, congressional hearings, things like that. One of the reasons actually that I chose it was that when I was very new to locations, like not even a full year in, this is one of the places that I'd had to go to set for a brief time. And I remember looking in it and seeing it was set up for a Senate hearing, and that's when it kind of clicked for me. And it's like, oh, so we're not just like finding things. I mean, we are just finding things, but it's not just like, parks, apartments, McMansions, or the like. We also have to find things that already exist here. A big part of our job is like, okay, well, now find me this place in Budapest over here downtown, and that's kind of like, it was like the clincher for me. So it's like, oh yeah, this is totally the department for me. As a creative person, I love trying to figure things out like that, or think outside of the box, which that's kind of like our whole job is outside of a box. And then we put them in the box, but yeah, so that was kind of where I really, it like crystallized for me, like this is locations. I kind of have always thought of locations as we're the behind the scenes, when it comes to the crew, because, we're kind of like the elves, the crew that we'll work with don't even know what we do. They just show up to these places and shoot, but that's kind of why I really love this place. And it's gorgeous. I mean, obviously, interiors and exteriors. And of course, like, it's been used for also, I think, federal buildings in Washington, like the White House and things like that. Beautiful marble first floor, that hallways people can walk through. You can do your, cool, like, walk and talks that you might see on the West Wing or something, one of those types of unbroken shots. But it's a really versatile building. And another reason, that I chose it is one of the last times I was in it was like the 2011 earthquake that we had. And I was just sitting in the room across from the ceremonial chamber with the set dresser, and this big piece of furniture started knocking against the wall. I'm like, I'm pretty sure that was an earthquake. And we sat a whole back and forth. He's like, no, I think it was the subway underneath. I'm like, dude, we've been here all day. I think, and we're New Yorkers. We know what a subway feels like. And then the set dressers across the hall came in. They were in the ceremonial chamber, and they said, I don't know what that was. That chandelier was rocking. And we thought it was going to come down. And I was just like, this building's over 150 years old. I don't think they built it for earthquake codes, and we should leave. And then that's when we got the evacuation alert from security, because they said, we don't know what that was, but we should get out. So, but yeah, I think it's a great building. I love it every single time I'm there. I just like find a new detail or historical thing to see in it. So,
One quick thing I'm going to say is that you might see this in movies at City Hall, because it's a much more attractive building than City Hall. And I think in one fine day, I'm like, well, it's not City Hall. And they're like, we don't care. This is much better. It's
Okay, Joe, 24 Evans Street.
All right. I think this speaks to the layers that we're kind of talking about. Brooklyn, I love Brooklyn. My mom grew up in Brooklyn, and the process of scouting has these exploratory layers. Everywhere in New York, if you're a New Yorker and you love New York, you love how the city is constantly changing, how every corner has all of these interesting layers of history. So as a scout, I love that process of exploring, and the waterfront was always kind of interesting to me, going to Red Hook and Dumbo, and this is in Vinegar Hill. This is 24 Evans in Vinegar Hill, which is the commandant's house. And this house was built in 1805. It was for the commandant of the Navy Yard, of the Brooklyn Navy Yard. But Vinegar Hill, was, farmland in the 1800s, the late 1800s. It was like, there's developers thought it was going to be a country getaway for New Yorkers, that they would like kind of market it as like, and it was hills. It had nice hills, and you could see the city, what have you. But this house was always interesting to me because it was intriguing. It's a large house, a home, kind of a mansion almost, with property. There's grass and a yard and a greenhouse, right in Brooklyn, right here in Vinegar Hill. And look how big that is with this porch and these details. But so I was always fascinated by it. And then I was scouting something, and I was like, okay, I finally have a reason to like try to get into this house and knock on these people's door. And part of that we alluded to earlier, but like, you know, scouting locations in New York, you're always trying to find like a slightly oversized version of everything because it works better for the logistics of filming. So like a townhouse, you know, is never quite big enough, a brownstone or townhouse. So I was like, that's a bigger townhouse. This is going to be a winner because it's got lots of space and you can light it and you can go anyway. So I was super excited to get in and meet the owners. I remember Charles Gilbert was the owner. I don't know if they still are, but it was interesting because check it out. Like this family was living there. The house was so big, like they didn't have the furniture. This isn't like they just moved in or something. They were living there, but they just had so much space. They didn't know what to do with it. So they just had chairs, you know, and there was another room with like kids stuff kind of sprawled about. And, you know, and then they had this yard and a greenhouse and a garage and it overlooked the Navy Yard. I thought it was so interesting. But, you know, so it was like a great utility location in a way to show, like when someone said, we need a townhouse, but like it has to be bigger. And you'd be like, okay, well, here's a bigger one. I mean, you know, what do you think? And then it also kind of speaks to that fun part of location scouting that we all enjoyed and exploring the history. So I love to go. Also, keep in mind, like 20 something years ago, going to Vinegar Hill, going to Red Hook, it was kind of an adventure, you know, and you didn't know where you were going to get a cup of coffee or a sandwich, so you had to figure that out. And you know, you kind of came up with places like, okay, if I'm going to Vinegar Hill, you know, there was like that one Mexican place in Dumbo that had coffee, and so you could get like a cafe con leche or a taco. Pedro, yeah. So, but like that was where you got lunch if you were scouting Vinegar Hill, and yeah, it was really like, you know, tumbleweeds rolling through Vinegar Hill. But you know, the other part of this house being in Vinegar Hill is like Vinegar Hill has these cool row houses built in the 1830s, 1850s. So it's got this neighborhood vibe and cobblestone streets. So it really had a lot, you know, cinematic features that are interesting. But one other thing about this that comes to mind for me is that it kind of is one of those wonderful locations that was like stumbling into something that you couldn't imagine existed in a neighborhood, an out-of-place thing that was always interesting, I think, to anyone kind of exploring the city when you come around a corner and it's like, this is a really interesting person or a really interesting place. But, you know, I think of it like the sixth borough in Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, which is the fictional borough that you kind of go to in your imagination. So this seemed like a sixth borough location to me.
I just wanted to say, it's like the great thing about our jobs, like, is, you know, some of us have graduated to higher positions. Some of us choose to still be location scouts because it's the one job where someone just gives you permission to like see a place like this and be like, I'm getting into that place, right? So it speaks to your sort of like inner deviousness or something as a kid. So like, well, I would normally just hop this fence and go in there, but it's like, no, now I just got to go through proper channels and go through there. And then you discover what's behind that gate or in that house and the room with 3 chairs and no purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the craft a little bit. You know, what you do, you're alluding to that, Eric, what you have to do, because I don't think people appreciate it. You know, I mean, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. People don't really understand what exactly it is that you're doing and the creative judgments that you have to constantly make, right?
Yeah, well, I always say, like, we've all had situations where we'll go in a place and someone's like, that is such an interesting job that you do, and it's so cool. And it's like, oh, yeah, it totally is. But I feel like sometimes people think it's like influencers almost. We just go out and discover things or get inspired by things. And I always say, Photos are the last step of scouting. That is the very last thing. If you got photos, that means that you did the work to get there. It is a lot of, Googling, emailing, calling, finding out who owns what, where can I find this in this neighborhood, archives. It's just like a lot of detective work. Sometimes people just be like, how did you find my number? And it's be like, you have no idea what I went through, to get a hold of people, to then get into a space to let us take the photos. So it is a lot of legwork and research first before we can even snap one single shot. And, at least in the internet age, that has become a lot easier to do, but it's still the same amount of work and sometimes literal legwork of just walking from this place to that place to that place, trying to find who owns what, can we get in? Oh, you said no, I'll come back tomorrow, maybe you'll change your mind. Just a whole lot of that. In addition to keeping in mind what does the production designer want, what does the director want, because you also want to make sure that you're, getting their vision as well. So you're not just finding any old house. What kind of house are we looking for? We're looking for Victorians. Okay, we probably want to go to Ditmas Park. Are we just looking for like regular row house, maybe Greenpoint, things like that. So also keeping those things in mind of what they want, also where you can find it and who you can get a hold of, who answers the door or the phone.
Yeah, I would just sort of like add to that. It's like, a lot of times, scouts are like some of the first people hired. It's like you, a couple other people, maybe sometimes just you, a production designer, maybe. There's a director somewhere off. They're not really that involved at that point. And you're given like a stack of 120 pages, right? And each one's like, oh, interior house. It's like, and it's written. I recently worked on a project that was written by someone from the UK with a team from Chicago, Los Angeles. Not a single person who's like creatively involved with this knew New York. And they're like, oh, and it's set in Queens. And you're like, okay, what do you think Queens looks like? And you're like, sort of like, really, and they didn't, because there's the, the King of Queens version of it. There's the, there's all these various versions at TV and movies, but you're given a lot. You're given like a slug line of a scene, interior event space, and not much else, right? And so like you're kind of interpreting. So it's your job. Sometimes with some collaboration, a lot of times not to be like, okay, so what kind of event space is it? And you're sort of like, okay, well, this is, they're middle class. Okay, so it's a church or it's a community center, so you're going through and now you're then going and collecting photos and then you're getting into what Malika said and, you're getting into a place, you're calling around. Like I oftentimes, it's like, sometimes you're thrown into like the sticks or some dangerous place like, like Red Hook used to be or and I've had projects like, okay, so like we need to find, go into this place. I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, is that safe? And I was like, well, if I just go in waving my hands to everybody and I have a camera around, like they're like, what are you doing? Oh, I'm making a movie. Oh, can I be in it? And suddenly you're the mayor, right? You become like the temporary mayor and everyone's like gets to know you and that opens doors and you go in and then you're like doing that over and over and over again. Sometimes, Joe and I worked on a movie last year, and it's like we must have shown 50 options. It was they went back to the first one we showed him in week 1, right? Because like you already know, you're just waiting for everyone to catch up with what you already know, because like you have this very unique set of skills. And I know that sounds like a line from a movie, it's like, I'm not Liam Neeson. But it's like where you have to, you have literal skills. You can interpret, okay, then you have photography skills, right? You have political skills in the sense that you can go and politic with people and of all walks of life, it's like, and then be friendly and charming and then be like, walk out and they were like, wow, that was a lot. And then sort of convey that to the people who are then going to follow you into that place a week later and say, well, just be careful when you go to this spot,
Yeah, I think the craft of it, as you say, I mean, we could do a whole seminar on like how to properly take photos and scouting photos and how to present them. That's really important. But yeah, I mean, it comes back to you're telling a story through film or television. So you're reading a script You're starting with the script and what's in the script, and then trying to find options that work for that scripted set, that scripted location. So that's really important, right? Because you might have a hardware store in the script. If you read the script, the scene is the guy thinks he's gonna steal the box of nails, and he goes out the back door into an alley. Well, so you have to know that you got to have some kind of back door option and an alley to go find the right locations, because you could go, I've seen that happen. You go, someone scouts 10 locations, and you're like, dude, where's the back alley? Where's the back door? 5 of these places. What do you mean? I don't know. I guess that could be, no. So, that's the craft, a key component of the craft of location scouting is understanding the script, understanding the story, and being able to present images that would be a version of telling that story. And it's a little like, there's this logistics element because it's creative, but it's also logistics because as a location scouts have to present, you kind of have to take yourself out of it and you're just presenting options. This could be, this is an event space and here's another event space. I'm just the presenter here. So, do you want a beautiful ornate event space that was built in the 19th century, or do you want a modern one that was built in the 60s? So,
it's so interesting. I'll just touch on something you said. That was like a lot of times, because you've been doing it, you kind of have a favorite folder. And it's not a favorite folder because you particularly like it, but it might be the right one. So in addition to the dynamics of talking way into someone's house as a total stranger, taking out your camera, photographing every room in their house and leaving with them waving goodbye with the thought getting into their head, what did I just do? I mean, there's that skill set. And then there's the skill set on the movie with the production designer, who's really your first person that you deal with. You show the production designer 50 locations of a house, they'll narrow it down to 10, you'll go together to the director. So there's the dynamics of how to deliver this. And so there's always the debate, and still with digital, do you show the best thing first? Yeah. Or maybe you show it last? And sometimes it takes a few days or even weeks to figure out your production designer and your director. And then you also have to, and maybe a European cinematographer thrown in who has his own, particulars. But what I think is also interesting is that your locations department is the fulcrum of it all, really, especially in New York, because if the camera truck can't park, you're not going to film that day. And so locations department is the most diplomatic and also has to dig out the information they need. And like one job in particular, I knew this house was the right house. It's absolutely the right house. But the designer was very cranky, and he was on a very, very cranky roll the day I showed him that, even though we had been scouting for this, but I knew it was the right house. I knew it was exactly what the director wanted, because sometimes different people hear different things. We drive up to it. He immediately dismisses it. I don't want to even get out of the car. We're going to keep going. And I'm like, damn it. So driving away, I only got a half a block away. And I was like, I'm sorry, we're going back. And we're going to look at that house. Because I knew he was in a very bad mood. I knew he hadn't slept. He was sort of distracted. He had just been on the phone. And I really went out on a bit of a limb to, you don't want to create an animosity, but I'm like, you really have to see that house. And it did wind up being the house. It was a big house in the movie. And so there's the dynamics within the film itself, plus the people.
So we're in a minute, we're going to go to questions from all of you, take some questions from all of you. I want to ask that, so our usher will run around and bring you the microphone in your seat. Please stand when you're asking, so we can know who you are. But I just want to ask one last question before we take audience questions. You know, you're talking about the relationships you have to have with your team, your creative teams, but I'm really curious about the relationship building you have to do with the people whose locations you're scouting and the persuasions that you have to have, persuasive skills you have to have, and how you close those deals and whether that's, so, I mean, it's not like people are going to say, yeah, sure, come on in all the time, right? So
Well, there's very different ways, different personalities, and depending on if you're a woman or a man, you have different tactics for using it. I don't always pitch my voice up high, but sometimes I do. Piggybacking on what Joe said about understanding the scene that you're scouting for, you not just for knowing what you're shooting to make sure that that's there, but also like, is there violent scene? Is there a murder? You have to communicate that to whomever you're talking to for their location, because they might be like super excited and they're just like, yeah, we're going to cover this place in blood. We'll clean it all off later, but just saying, so it's very like, you kind of have to get a read of people, and that's something that as scouts, kind of a skill we developed of like getting a feel, is this a person who's really going to go for it if I mention this? Or because you want to make sure they know what they're getting into if they are chosen, but you also don't want to just say everything and it's like, yeah, you probably have about 10 grips and they're just going to roll some stuff in, but don't worry, we have scenics to clean up any scuffs they make. It's like, you don't want to do that. So it's a delicate balancing act of it. I mean, first and foremost, like, we are people persons, and we have to be, because you do want to make people feel comfortable with the idea of having, like the army roll up into their home and own it for a bit. So, it's kind of like being personable, developing relationships. There are people that I'm still friends with from jobs like 20 years ago, and I'll just like say, hey, how are you? Like just call up like regular, or they'll text me, or locations where it's like they had a good experience because, we did our jobs as locations people, and, we'll call them back for a different location and they'll be like, I'd love to have you. Also, how are you? How are things going? So, but it's really, you have to like build it right off the bat. We're like the vanguard for the entire production. So it's like right off the bat, you really have to like let them know that you can trust you, because you can, but also like assure them, I always try to make them aware that I'm aware of that I'm a guest in their house, that the crew will be guests, they can, if they're uncomfortable, feel free to voice that with us. We want to address any concerns, but just make them feel comfortable, and that we only just want you for your space. And it's like, yeah, that's part of it, but also it's like as a person, at least for me, it's like it's like, no, I'm acknowledging that you're actually allowing us to do this, and I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, I always find it's every time, especially with houses, like personal space, you're starting off this relationship with like, whoever's on the other side of that door is afraid of me. And they don't really know it, and I can't let them on, but I'm afraid of them, right? Like, I don't know what a lot of times is going to be behind that door. So I come in and I'm like, oh, and if they've never been through it, you're just kind of like, no, like, I'm just going to do a quick walking tour, and I'm going to start here and take photographs through each space. And if there's ever a place where you don't want me to go, you just tell me. It's like, and meanwhile, I'm just like, I don't know what's going to be upstairs. I don't know what's going to be downstairs. And it's like, and I can't let on to any of that, right? So you're just kind of like, okay, and like get in and get out, be efficient. You're thinking like, going back to what our days were like in the lab, you're trying to do everything in order to make your post days, post-production day much faster and much easier, right? So you're like, this person's chattering in your ear, right? Like, oh, so what do you think of my curtains? And what do you think? Sorry about the mess. And it's like, oh, it's much better. Do you mind dogs? You're like, oh, it's like all these things. And you're just trying to snap your pictures and get in and get out. And like, oh, I got to get to this appointment 10 minutes from now. But it's like, I find it's like, it's this really, really unique dynamic of just being like, all parties are scared shitless, right? It's just like, I don't know what this means. I don't know what you mean. Are you real? So I'm always like, if I can deliver as much information to them up front, Like I might as well put my social security number on my letter, right? Because it's like they can look me up. They can, all these things that sort of like, oh yeah, exactly, right? Because then they're like, yeah, please go into my closet, or whatever it is. It's like, what's in the closet?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'll just add locations. People are very thoughtful and respectful and caring, and there's a business aspect to it, of course, because anywhere that you find that's a good enough location that you end up shooting there, someone else is going to want to go back there and film something else there. So you need to really make sure that it's a good experience for people so that they'll say, hey, that went pretty well. I'd do it again. And sure, it doesn't hurt that you're getting paid but that sometimes it's just, it's worth the inconvenience because you are making some money. But yeah, I mean, there's the art to getting in the house or the location or providing those assurances that the production's going to take care of the property. And then there's also actually like getting someone to sign a location agreement, a contract, if you will. And that's another thing, right? Like just being able. I was always inspired by Glengarry Glen Ross. Always be closing.
Let's take some questions. I know you have an answer, but I'm cognizant of time, and I want to get to give some people a chance to ask some questions.
What are you using to shoot locations now? Is it like iPhones, or is it depending on the job? Do you ever do like 3D LiDAR scans of things? Like, how does that work?
I use a Fuji film camera. A lot of people scout with phones. I personally, I don't. Like, I feel going back to getting into a house, walking up with a camera gives you a sort of sense of I'm a professional scout. I'm not knocking other people that do it. I also just think images on an iPhone look a little flatter, a little wider. It's kind of like, so I stick with a camera. I do use an iPhone to get like a facade, like on a street. Sometimes you can't get the full, I don't go wide enough on the lens, so I'll just pull out the iPhone because I can go to like 12 millimeters or whatever it is and boom, get it in one shot, but always a camera.
Yeah, I use a camera too. The times that I'll use a phone is either there's been a malfunction or you're in a setting like you're in a restaurant, there's people around, having a camera, makes people very self-conscious, things like that. Hotel lobbies or things like that, that's when I'll use the phone. But otherwise, I use like a mirrorless DSLR camera.
Yeah, but the age-old, a photographer told me, like, the best camera is the one that you have on you.
50.
Right.
Oh, I also was curious about like how the iPhone impacted your careers, but then going back, like you were talking about the how the 1 hour photo changed your field, and now I'm interested in like how did the digital camera shape your careers and change your field?
As a production manager, what I felt might have been the biggest change is that there was you edited yourself when you made these, because otherwise you'd have stacks. And the ease of the digital cameras it was a bit, sometimes it's just way too much. And now that you're on SmugMug and you're in the room and you're watching, I'm a production manager, so I'm not weighing in necessarily creatively, but I'm like, oh my God, just flip, keep going. And there's a little less of thought with some people, not everybody, that goes into it that you just couldn't do it back then, physically.
Yeah, in a way, we used to have more control creatively over the presentation because you were saying, here's these 5 options, and then transitioning to digital, you have to just figure out those mechanisms of how you're ordering things so you can still do it, and I think that's an important part of the process. These now currently is, are you able to present things in a way where it's not just a pile of photos that are you get lost in the computer screen.
I think that's the advantage that some of us have who have used to do the folders, is that we still shoot that same mindset, right? Shooting things, presenting them in order, like walking through, what's the reverse, what's through this door, what's through that. And some folks who've, again, like times have changed, they shoot with an iPhone, they shoot a lot, right? Because they shoot vertically, and you're like, yeah, but nobody ever turns the camera vertically. It's like, and I know that makes me sound old because I don't have TikTok, but I think the thing is like, I think that's what separates this, the different levels of scouts. They're still applying that same thoroughness and efficiency that they did when building something.
I'll just say quickly, I mean, it's amazing now, though, you can have like that room full of boxes of folders is on your Dropbox on your phone. So you can quickly just rifle through and pick up. You can, have a friend send you a link of like 16, bars that are new that you hadn't seen or whatever. So just it's amazing the resources that you have technologically now.
Thank you guys for the talk. I'm wondering how location scouting has evolved, how its position within the industry has evolved since the 80s. In other words, like what the labor conditions are like in terms of the kinds of contracts that you're getting, or like whether you're credited on a movie or not. Like how much of that is dictated by contracts? Like I know that that scouts are unionized with the Teamsters now, and managers are with DGA.
I mean, it's been huge since the 80s, 90s. This was a non-union position. The industry has been union for decades and decades, but locations people were non-union. Certainly when I started, there's some history with the Directors Guild of America with the location manager position. That has been a DGA position, the same kind of category as first assistant directors and a unit production manager. But that's only in New York and Chicago, So, but, in the course of the last 20, 30 years, yes, location scouts are now Teamsters in New York and a lot of other places, so that's very cool. Same film and television local as the drivers, our transportation department, and casting as well. They're also Teamsters. So yes, scouts are union. The managers and assistant managers are union, and that's the case throughout the country. There's the location manager guild international is like an association that many location scouts and managers are part of, and so they celebrate the talents of all these amazing location scouts and managers and have awards and all of that. There's still not a category, a nomination category for locations the same way there is for like set design or other categories, but I think that covers it.
Yeah.
I think we time has flown. We have time for one more question, and I think the mic is with somebody.
Yes. Hi. Thank you for speaking to us about location scouts.
Can you speak up a little, please?
Oh, hi. Sorry. I'm a little bit nervous, but I want to say thank you. I think the magic happens through you guys, which is amazing. Honestly, you guys tell the story through the lens. I'm just curious. I know that technology has changed, and we have the use of generative AI, artificial intelligence. Has that ever affected, or do you think it's going to change in the way the industry is going forward? Because we still need the human eye to capture that beauty through location.
I only recently, and I don't know enough about AI to know if generative AI is different from just ChatGPT, but I'm sure some studio or something will try to just CGI or anything else, try to recreate something. It's it'll go so far and probably past us. Me personally, I've recently used ChatGPT to just as a sort of better search engine for something very architecturally specific that a production designer was asking me, he's like, more brutalist, you know? And I was just like, great, like, dear ChatGPT, tell me every, you know, like I start this conversation with this box that like leads me to Westchester. I was like, what about Nassau County? What about New Jersey? You know, it's like, and it was great. And it's a really good tool. But I would say, you know, just again, it's like camera, phone, ChatGPT, you know, water bottle. You know, it's just another tool to me.
Yeah, I mean, they do have the volume, you know, for sets where they can just make their own. So, like, you won't need locations, you know, scouts as much for jobs like that. And I won't say, like, any, you know, job is safe when it comes to AI because we don't know yet where it'll go, where they'll take it, you know, what they'll use it for. But, you know, I will say, at least for us, you're always going to need somebody to call somebody or somebody to go in person. You know, we can have folders that are like a year old or 20 years old, and the question will be, does somebody still live there? Well, somebody's got to go and find that out. You know, so just us, and I'm only talking strictly about scouting itself, you know, not the many other positions and departments that it could affect. I mean, you're still going to need people on the ground. You know, what that looks like as generative AI gets better and, you know, they're like, the volume gets cheaper, or there's more of them, like, I don't know. But you're always going to need to find out if they're going to film on location. Somebody needs to be there. Somebody needs to find out what's in there. You know, that mold isn't going to announce itself, you know? So one of us always has to be there for that, so.
I mean, the industry is still remarkably in person. I mean, I like to say that we are putting on a live show. The audience just comes later. So if there was a way to make the kinds of movies that we make without 250 people, we'd be there already. But you need the actors, you need makeup, you need sound, you need cameras, you need light, you need a script, you need all these things. So for now, as long as we're, you know, and obviously some things you don't need any of that. Zootopia didn't need any of it. They just needed some actors in a, you know, booth. But they still needed actors. And so I think that exactly what Malika was saying, the human interaction exists with every single location, every single traffic change you're doing, every single cop, the Department of Bridges when you need them. And, you know, it's all so very human.
It is a great question, and I think there's another element that's similar to every other part of our society, which is like you'll just get people using the robots to like look something up and then ask you about it. So someone will basically use AI to say, "Hey, I found this house." Or there's a brownstone in Brooklynites. Have you ever been here? And you'll be like, yeah, it's Malika just scouted it. It's, you know, she has pictures already. So, you know, we're experiencing that like in every department of, you know, people use the robots to be like, hey, I heard about this thing or that thing. And, you know, it kind of comes back to, it's still, the human expertise is still working pretty well.
I think that human element is a great way to end. So thank you all for being here. Thank you all for coming.